All right, let's jump right in. We're catching up with Jesus on what is really his final high-stakes journey. He's left Galilee, he's on his way to Jerusalem, and you can just feel the tension ratcheting up. The opposition is getting more and more intense with every step he takes.
Yeah, and on this trip, the religious leaders, they're not just asking casual questions anymore. No, they are actively trying to trap him. They're laying these verbal landmines, questions that are just loaded with political and theological dynamite. I mean, the stakes are about as high as they can get.
And these traps, they're really clever. They're all built around three things that, let's be honest, get right to the core of who we are: our relationships, our status, where we fit in the world, and our security. The big stuff. So what's amazing is how Jesus responds. He doesn't just give some slick, clever answer to get out of the trap. No. What he does is he takes their questions and uses them to turn everything, everything, completely upside down. He's about to redefine what actually matters. So first up, they spring the trap, and it's a direct shot aimed at one of our most basic, most fundamental relationships: marriage.
Okay, so a group of Pharisees comes up to him, to test him, and they ask this question. Now, on the surface, it sounds like a pretty straightforward legal question, but trust me, this thing is a masterpiece of a trap.
See, this wasn't really a question. It was a theological minefield. At the time, there were two major schools of thought on divorce. You had Rabbi Hillel, who was super lenient. A guy could divorce his wife for burning his dinner. And then you had Rabbi Shammai, who was incredibly strict, saying it was only okay for adultery. The Pharisees didn't care what Jesus thought. They just wanted to force him to pick a side. If he sides with Hillel, he looks like he's soft on God's law. If he sides with Shammai, he could get in big trouble with the political rulers. It's a lose-lose.
But Jesus, he does something nobody sees coming. He just completely sidesteps the whole debate. He doesn't pick Hillel or Shammai. Instead, he uses this Greek phrase, up arches, which means from the beginning. He's essentially hitting the reset button on the whole conversation, taking them all the way back to Genesis, to God's original design for marriage, way before all these human rules and loopholes ever existed.
With one move, he completely reframes the whole thing. He's saying, you're asking the wrong question. You're asking about exit clauses. We should be talking about the sacredness of the union itself. He's not acting like a lawyer here. He's acting like a prophet, calling everyone back to Eden. He's redefining marriage. It's not just a human contract you can break. It's a divine covenant. And you have to understand the real-world impact of this. For the women listening in that crowd, who had basically zero legal rights and could be thrown out on the street for the smallest reason, this wasn't some harsh, restrictive rule. This was a fortress. It was a shield. It was a radical, powerful declaration of their dignity, their value, and their protection. Just incredible. Okay, so he's just redefined our most intimate relationships. And what happens next? Bam! He's immediately hit with a situation that's all about status. And his response here is every bit as revolutionary. So you gotta get the context here. In the first century, children were, they were at the absolute bottom of the social ladder. They had no rights, no status, and frankly, a lot of people just saw them as an economic burden until they could work. So when some parents start bringing their kids to Jesus just for a blessing, his own disciples try to wave them off, like they're just an unimportant nuisance. But Jesus, he actually gets indignant with his own guys. He tells them to stop, and he welcomes the children. And then he drops this bombshell. He looks at these powerless, invisible little members of society and says, the kingdom of heaven, it belongs to people just like them. And listen, this is so much more than just a sweet story about Jesus being nice to kids. It's a profound statement about what his kingdom is all about. He's flipping society's entire definition of power and importance completely upside down. It's like he's saying, oh, you think you're important? Your social status means absolutely nothing here. This brings us to the third and final trap. And this one hits on some of our deepest anxieties. We're talking about security, about wealth, and that nagging question of what it really takes to earn our way to God. So this rich young man comes running up to Jesus, and this guy is the poster child for success. Seriously, he's kept all the commandments, he's a good person, he's got money, he's done everything right, and he asks, what's the one last thing I need to do to be perfect? And Jesus' answer just stops him cold. You really can't overstate how shocking this was. In that culture, being rich wasn't seen as a problem. It was seen as proof that God was on your side.
wealth was a sign of blessing. So this guy, he was the model citizen. So for Jesus to tell him that his greatest asset, his wealth, was actually his biggest obstacle, that would have been absolutely mind-blowing to everyone listening. And then Jesus delivers one of the most famous lines in the entire Bible. He uses this wild, impossible image to drive home a huge spiritual truth. You just can't cling to your worldly security with one hand and grab hold of the kingdom of God with the other. It doesn't work that way. Well, as you can imagine, this just leaves his disciples completely speechless. I mean, they're floored. Their thinking is, if this guy, the best of the best, the guy who has it all together, can't make it, then what hope is there for any of us? And their question just says what everyone's thinking. They are completely bewildered. Think about it. They've just heard that the ideal for marriage is unbreakable, that you need to be like a powerless child, and that being rich is actually a huge spiritual danger. So of course they ask the only logical question left. Who on earth can possibly be saved then? And this is the answer that pulls it all together. Jesus looks them right in the eye, and he basically agrees with them. He says, "You're right. For a person, it is impossible. You can't do it on your own. You can't just will yourself into that kind of faithfulness in marriage, or manufacture the humility of a child, or break free from the hold that money has. It's impossible for us." But then he adds, it's not impossible for God. So what's the thread that ties all three of these stories together? It's humility, right? The Pharisees came to the conversation with all their clever arguments. The disciples came with their own ideas about who's important and who's not. The rich young man came with his perfect resume of good deeds. And Jesus basically says the kingdom isn't for any of that. It's for the people who show up empty-handed, knowing all they have to offer is their need. And this really gets to the heart of it. These impossible standards that Jesus lays out, they're not a new to-do list for us to try and fail at. No, they're designed to be a mirror. They're meant to show us that we can't do it on our own. They're meant to bring us to the end of ourselves, so we're finally forced to just rely on God's grace. And that brings us to the final, really challenging punchline of the whole chapter. Jesus says, many who are first will be last, and the last first. This whole journey through Matthew 19 is about reevaluating what we put first. So the question it kind of leaves hanging in the air for us is, when we look at our own lives, our relationships, our status, our security, what's the thing that's first for us that maybe God is asking us to make last?